Did you ever hear the tragedy of the Shady Rest Inn? I thought not. It's not a story the Theramore God would tell you. The Shady Rest Inn was an establishment out on the border of the Barrens, so prosperous and so well known that it could even bring members of the Horde and the Alliance together. It was run by a fellow named James Hyle, and the only thing he had to fear was someone who wasn't too fond of this collaboration, which of course there was. The inn mysteriously burned down one night, and the perpetrator remains unknown. Ironic. The inn could save others from conflict, but not itself. One of my favorite elements of classic WoW is how the world feels alive and complex, with hundreds of NPCs and thousands of quests and items telling countless stories about exploration, conflict, and mystery as you play through the game. There's always more to discover, and today, I want to take a look at one of the most intriguing storylines in the mid-game, the tragedy of the Shady Rest Inn. I'll be going over the classic story, along with the conclusion that was later added in the Burning Crusade, and the broader lore implications we can draw from this story. I recently played through this adventure on both factions, and while I'll primarily be focusing on the Alliance perspective, I'll also refer to the Horde investigation when it can give us some additional details. As always, thank you for the fun comments and support, and with all that being said, let's get right into it. Today's story can actually begin in two different places, but we'll start with the more out-of-the-way option. In a quiet corner of Stormwind City sits the Blue Recluse, a reputable tavern serving travelers, mages, and even nobles from time to time. One of the apprentice chefs, Connor Rivers, shares a bit about his past if you meander past the bar and into the kitchen, telling you about the innkeeper who taught him everything he knows, James Hyle, who left Stormwind a few years back to find work with his brother Vincent in Menethil Harbor. Traveling north, you quickly discover the port is not your final destination, as Vincent informs you that James was one of the civilians to accompany Jaina Proudmoore across the sea during the Third War. Now that the fighting has settled down, Vincent explained that James was planning to set up his own inn, the high point of his career as a cook. He encourages you to take the nearby boat to Dustwallow Marsh, where the human city of Theramore is located. Once there, you consult the town clerk, who has this to say about the name James Hyle. James Hyle, of course, the Shady Rest Inn incident. If you have any information about what happened there, I would urge you to speak with Captain Vimes about it. He's handling the investigation. The captain standing nearby is your next contact, but for those who came here without doing these breadcrumb quests, there is another avenue to explore, and one that is personal in a different sort of way. You might come across Guard Byron near the local inn, who points out a man sitting up near the wall, muttering a song to himself. He'll bring you mead, he'll bring you beer, a grinning face from ear to ear. He's served us all from year to year, we call him Smiling Jim. As you can probably gather, this is James Hyle, but something has obviously gone very wrong. Like the clerk, Byron encourages you to talk to the captain if you want to learn more. This is a subject folks do not want to talk about here in Theramore, and we'll soon know why after speaking with the captain. He opened an inn at the edge of the Barrens, wanted to make a nice place for travelers to stop over. Maybe he was thinking too big, but the inn did do well for a while. Then we lost control of the roads in the marsh, and the ogres took over. James was too stubborn to give up his dream for safety within our walls, and the Shady Rest Inn was burnt to the ground. His wife and child were unable to escape. We managed to drag James out, but he hasn't been the same since. If you would like to lend assistance to the investigation, what remains of the inn can be found at the border of the Barrens. This is the tragedy of the Shady Rest Inn, a place of respite and camaraderie incinerated by an unknown party, and it's up to us to figure out why. Captain Vimes will be helping you with the investigation if you're an Alliance player, but it might surprise you to learn the Horde also has a stake in examining this incident. Krog, an orc who has partnered with the ogres of Brackenwell Village, petitions Horde adventurers to check out the ruins too, saying the following: "Why do I care? I don't. Not about the humans anyway, but I had a spy placed in that inn and I will not let his death go unanswered. I need to know who did this." It's difficult to confirm one way or another, but this quote seems to imply the Shady Rest Inn may have been a neutral ground of sorts, with James welcoming in races of both the Alliance and Horde for food and lodging. A Horde spy was clearly able to hang out here without raising suspicion, and he was likely placed here to try and gather information from the other side, possibly off-duty Theramore guards, or even bands of Theramore deserters, as we'll soon see. The fact that the inn was established right on the border of Horde territory also supports this theory. It makes no sense to set up shop in such a vulnerable position unless you plan on catering to those in power, much like how the goblins are able to operate a town in the Barrens, or how a dwarven brewer is able to set up camp right next to a squad of Defias bandits. I think you see my point. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but it's been my understanding for a while that both factions probably benefited from the Shady rest, making this story even more tragic when you consider this would have been a symbol of the improving relations between the two factions. Years of progress, now gone up in flames. While neither one of these NPCs give you a follow-up quest to travel to the ruins in Classic, this step is more of a non-quest, implying that if you do go there of your own accord, you might just find something worthwhile. So with that, it's time to head through the marsh and find the scene of the crime. In western Dustwallow, as the road begins to slope upward out of the marshy terrain, you can find the remnants of the Shady Rest Inn. The sign and brick chimney are the only features to really survive the blaze, and the rest of the building has been completely destroyed. Wreckage of James Hyle's dream now abandoned on the side of the road. One thing I want to mention here is that we don't really know exactly when the arson took place. Krog's dialogue and the Alliance quests seem to indicate a time of a few weeks ago, but one of the quests here at the ruins mentions the still smoking skeleton of the inn, which would push the timeline up quite a bit. I'm inclined to say this is an anachronism, and the incident probably happened several weeks before you arrive on Kalimdor, and there are also a few other small inconsistencies like this throughout the story. Anyway, after patch 2.3 of the Burning Crusade, which filled in several pieces of this questline, you may have checked in with Inspector Tarim here, but he doesn't play a major role in the story, and really just tells you to look around the ruins. It is here where the story splits into 3 distinct fragments, each corresponding to one of the main pieces of evidence you can find here. First, there is a trail of large, suspicious hoofprints just outside the ruin. This fork is the shortest, and you basically just relay this discovery to your contact back in town, where they dispatch a scout to follow the trail and find where it leads. Early suspects include the Quillboar and Centaur, both of which have an aggressive presence in the Barrens, and an early version of the story even had the perpetrators being revealed as a band of Centaur all the way from Maradon, but we'll soon see where the true investigation leads. This step even shows a bit of Krog's empathy for the humans he claims not to care about. "Did I tell you? It wasn't just that the inn was burned down. The owner's woman and pup were killed. Bad business, that." The second piece of evidence is a blackened iron shield, wedged into the bricks of the chimney. Alliance players who deliver it back to Theramore seek out the blacksmith Kaz Two-Sprocket, a gnome who looks it over and guesses it is large enough to fit a Tauren, though he can't say for certain. The Horde adventurer reaches a similar conclusion after visiting the renowned Tauren blacksmith Mosarn in Thunderbluff, though in Classic the trail goes cold after talking with him. We'll come back to the shield later. The final item you locate at the ruins is a Theramore guard badge belonging to one Pavel Reith. Checking the guard registry back at the Citadel, the adjutant informs you that Reith is listed as missing, which the captain clarifies as meaning military desertion. This is not an uncommon theme here in Theramore, with dozens of Marines having abandoned the city in the past few years in defiance of new leadership, or to further their own goals. With Reith now as a main suspect in the case, your trail leads you to Lost Point, where a gang of deserters led by Balos Jackin has taken up residence. After a nice beatdown, Jackin reveals that he kicked Reith out of the squad for being too aggressive toward the ogres of Brackenwall, leaving him to fend for himself in the marsh. Captain Vimes ends with this, the final alliance quest of the chain in Classic. "I will send Lieutenant Caldwell to deal with the deserters at Lost Point. In addition, I will instruct him to find Reith. The marsh is not so big and trackless that he should be unable to find him." Members of the Horde who pick up the badge and deliver it to Krog get to see the conclusion of this part of the story, And it's yet another example of complementary storytelling going on here. Only by completing the perspectives of the Alliance and Horde do you truly get to see the full picture. Krog informs you that he knows of the exiled Wreath, and has sent his minion Ogron to track him down and learn more about the burning of the inn. After meeting up with the scout and traveling through the marsh, you find Wreath at an isolated camp, and despite being a deserter and a thief, he vehemently denies being involved in the fire. Before you can finish questioning him though, the Marines led by Lieutenant Caldwell arrive and witness the bizarre situation unfolding. "Pavel Wreath, found you at last, and consorting with ogres now? No fear, even deserters and traitors are afforded some mercy. Private, show Lieutenant Wreath some mercy. Now, let's clean up the rest of the trash, men." You defend yourself from the guards, but Wreath is killed in the attack, eliminating your source of information. Reporting back to Krog, it seems all leads have been dealt with, and the trail has gone cold for now. This is the end of the story in Classic, and in a way it mirrors the missing diplomat quest line that also ends here in Dustwallow. The quests are complete, but they don't have a satisfying end. It wouldn't be until patch 2.3 of the Burning Crusade expansion, nearly 3 years later, when these stories would be finalized. But before we can get to that, I want to examine just this original set of quests. Who is the most likely culprit? It seems Wreath is probably not guilty, and while there are some interesting theories online claiming that the vindictive Caldwell might have assassinated Wreath to cover up his own crimes, I don't think that is likely either, especially given the large shield and hoof prints we found at the scene. On my Rare Mobs of Classic WoW video from a few years back, some folks thought that the Grim Totem Tauren Harb Foul Mountain would have made for a cool villain requiring some cross-zone travel, but the Grim Totem Tauren and Thousand Needles are just too low level in their current form. Maybe Quillbore or Centaur, but we don't have enough information to say this is what Blizzard originally intended, just that early beta quest leading players to Maradon. A little out of the way for something like this. Overall, I think the conclusion that was implemented later on did a nice job of summing things up and making more of the zone feel complete, while still giving us a few more clues as to a larger threat on the horizon. Let's take a look at the patch 2.3 quests, and finally find some justice for the family of James Hyle. Once you've completed the quests for all 3 pieces of evidence, Inspector Tarim turns in his report and informs Captain Vimes that the leading culprit is the Grim Totem Tauren, who have lately been expanding their influence within Dustwallow Marsh. This is meant to take place right after the end of the previous quests, not 3 in-game years later, so just keep in mind this full series of events is all happening at the same time. On the Horde side, Mosarn the Blacksmith shares some more information with you regarding the shield you showed him earlier. "My apprentices and I produce such a large volume of arms and armor that it's almost impossible to recall details about any individual piece. Not only do we outfit the braves defending Tauren lands, but the Grim Totems have a particular fondness for my work." This is how the Horde discovers the Grim Totem may have been responsible for the fire, and back in Dustwallow, both sides begin to set their sights on their lead suspects. We raid Blackhoof Village, finding Grim Totem armaments that match the Blackened shield, and a battle plan that reveals the motive behind the attack. "I have sent you a force of considerable size, Elder, but you must take care in your activities. Your first priority will be to halt the advance of the Alliance curs into our lands. Some of the more adventurous humans have already started the construction of a large building on the border with the Barrens. See to it that they know their kind are not welcome beyond the borders of their wretched Theramore. Lastly, a word of caution to you, Elder. Do not make your plans known to the ogres of Brackenwall. Those brutes are incapable of even the slightest hint of discretion." Again, there may be a small anachronism here, as the note mentions the inn is a recent construction, not a well-known building that has been up and running for probably a year or two, but something that is much more interesting here is the author, Agashem, somebody we've talked about before on this channel. As discussed in my Arikara conspiracy video, I believe Agashem is the alter ego of none other than Magatha Grim Totem, the High Elder of the tribe who claims to be loyal to Thunderbluff, but is secretly still commanding the destructive Grim Totems who refused to join the Horde. This is the same pseudonym used by the writer of the Grim Totem notes in Thousand Needles, giving us another clue this name is a significant point, not a one-off side character. And plus, Rearranging the pseudonym gives us Magasha, which is one letter away from Magatha. How convenient. Back on the main story, after seeking some guidance from Tabitha, the Mage of the Marsh, players are sent to the secluded Direhorn Post, the last holdout of Grim Totem in the area, and the home of the raiding party who burned down the Shady Rest Inn. You raid the camp, then burn down their tents as retribution. Poetic justice. While you're here, you might also eliminate an unusual visitor, Apothecary Scylla, an undead Forsaken carrying a note describing an alliance between the Grim Totem and a group of undead in Lordaeron. Once again, this is a parallel to the Forsaken Grim Totem alliance that was hinted at back in Thousand Needles, and it's another point of evidence in favor of Magatha pulling these strings in the background. You can bring this note to a representative of your faction, and it's here where the true scope of the sinister plot is revealed beyond just the inn itself. If this is what it appears to be, the Forsaken have some explaining to do. The antics of the Grim Totems have long tried the War Chief's patience. We have traditionally treated it as a matter to be settled among the Tauren people, but this letter may change it. It will take time to investigate these suspicions, but do not speak to anyone of what you have seen this day. This is a very interesting dynamic, and it shows the weird gray area the Grim Totem fall into with the Horde. They're certainly closer to the Horde than the Alliance, but they're hostile to players of both factions, and are now undermining the tentative peace between Theramore and the Horde here on Kalimdor. It seems most of the Horde is wanting to ignore them and let these outcasts do their own thing, but this situation is putting that to the test, revealing a dark conspiracy that spans not just Dustwallow Marsh, but potentially much of Kalimdor. The Alliance counterpart to this quest is rather similar, confirming that Forsaken meddling spells trouble for both major factions. We've long had misgivings about the cooperation between the Horde and the Forsaken, and this only confirms those suspicions. With the backing for Forsaken magic and arms, the Grim Totems would become an even more fearsome enemy. The balance of power in Kalimdor could shift considerably. A grim partnership to be sure, but that's a story for another time. The final step on the Horde side is to report back to Krog, who commends you on solving the mystery, but advises you to keep quiet on the Grim Totem business until after the War Chief is made aware of this threat. Alliance players report back to Captain Vimes in Theramore, who offers a solemn congratulations on delivering justice for the victims of the Shady Rest. There is one more heart-wrenching step to complete to put this matter to rest. Laying a wreath on the grave of the Heil family. I won't spoil what happens while you're out there, but it does provide some resolution to this horrible event, and it's one of those few moments in WoW where it hits you right in the feels, a truly bittersweet ending to a complex and tragic story. The mystery is now solved, but we never know the true fate of Smiling Jim after he's told of this investigation. Will he ever recover and become James Heil again? Does Vincent Heil ever learn the fate of his family? And what about the young apprentice, Connor Rivers, who now carries on his legacy? These are questions that don't have answers, but like I said at the beginning of the video, the complexity of Azeroth isn't meant to be fully understood. We simply experience the parts of the world that we're allowed to experience. I want to leave you with one final detail today. 1 month before patch 2.3 released and this mystery was finally solved, Blizzard released a soundtrack titled Taverns of Azeroth, and wouldn't you know it, they included a track titled Shady Rest. A hint at what was to come in the next update perhaps, but I prefer to think of it as a nod to something that once was, the product of a man and his family now immortalized in song across the lands of Azeroth. Maybe next time you seek refuge at an inn, and hear a bard strike up the tune, you'll find a traveler who's familiar with the tale. Someone who can tell you the tragedy of the Shady Rest Inn. Thank you all so much for watching. This questline is one of my absolute favorites, even more so now that I've made this video, and I think the two-sided storyline here is a masterclass in blending the large, faction-level interactions with the small personal stories that WoW does so well. Maybe next time you're leveling a character in Classic or TBC, you'll think about these quests in a whole new way, and I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into it. Welcome to the season of Hidden Horizons, and be sure to keep an eye out for bonus secrets this holiday season. A special thank you to my channel members who provide bonus support for these videos, and until next time, may the Force be with you.